at that question too. So now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Brian Miller joined EPC in 2015, where he is Field Applications Engineer for the Eastern North America. He has over 30 years of experience in power electronics as a design engineer and as a field application engineer. At IBM and Sony Ericsson, he designed small, efficient power supplies and battery chargers for laptops, tablets, and other equipment, and designed a custom analog controller IC for laptop DC and battery charging. Previous to EPC, Brian was a field application engineer for Semtech, where he was involved in designs for AC/DC, DC/DC, LED lighting, and other areas. He has authored patents, articles, and talks, and he received his MSE and BS degrees from Duke University. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Renee, and welcome to everybody.